In the dark waters off Guadalcanal, Japanese sailors spoke in hushed tones about an American cruiser that fired so fast, her guns sounded like machine guns tearing through fabric. They weren't wrong to fear her. USS Helena CL-50 would survive what should have killed her at Pearl Harbor, only to return with a vengeance that would reshape naval warfare in the Pacific. This is the story of the ship that refused to die, the cruiser that earned her nickname through sheer firepower, and the 1,000 men who made her legend possible. In an era when battleships were kings and carriers were the future, Helena proved that a light cruiser with determination could change the course of history. The story of USS Helena begins not in combat, but in the depths of the Great Depression. As America slowly rebuilt its economy, the Navy embarked on an ambitious program to modernize its aging fleet. The St. Louis-class cruisers represented a new philosophy in naval design, ships that could deliver overwhelming firepower while maintaining the speed to dance with death. When her keel touched the ways at Brooklyn Navy Yard on that cold December day in 1936, few could have imagined the destiny awaiting hull number 50. The workers who riveted her plates and shaped her armor were building more than a warship. They were crafting an instrument of survival and vengeance. Helena stretched 608 feet from stem to stern, her sleek hull cutting through water with a beam of just 61 feet. But her true glory lay in her armament. 15 6-inch guns nested in 5 triple turrets gave her a broadside that could unleash hell. These weren't ordinary naval rifles. The Mark 16 guns could cycle rounds at an astonishing rate. In perfect conditions, each barrel could spit out 8 to 10 rounds per minute. Do the math. That's potentially 150 shells per minute from her main battery alone. No wonder the Japanese would come to call her the machine gun cruiser. Her secondary battery packed 8 5-inch dual-purpose guns, equally comfortable swatting aircraft or punishing destroyers. 4 Parsons turbines drove her through the waves at 32.5 knots, fed by 8 Babcock and Wilcox boilers that could push 100,000 horsepower through her 4 bronze screws. With a range of 10,000 nautical miles, she could hunt anywhere in the Pacific. But specifications tell only part of the story. What made Helena special was her crew, 868 officers and men who would transform steel and gunpowder into something approaching immortality. Helena slipped into the East River on August 27, 1938, christened by the wife of Montana's senator. The bottle of champagne that shattered across her bow was meant to bring good luck. Whether it did or not would depend on your definition of luck. Her early career reads like a peacetime travelogue. After commissioning in September 1939, Helena sailed south to Uruguay, where her crew got an ominous preview of their future. The wreckage of the German pocket battleship Graf Spee lay in Montevideo harbor, scuttled after the Battle of the River Plate. Young American sailors stared at the twisted metal and wondered if they were looking at their own fate. The Pacific called, and Helena answered. By September 1940, she joined the Pacific Fleet, spending months in Hawaiian waters perfecting her deadly art. Gunnery drills, damage control exercises, navigation training, the endless repetition that transforms civilians into warriors. As 1941 drew to a close, Helena entered Mare Island Navy Yard for upgrades. The Navy, perhaps sensing the storm approaching, fitted her with new 1.1-inch anti-aircraft guns. It was like giving a boxer brass knuckles just before a street fight. On the morning of December 7, 1941, Helena rested at berth 1010 in Pearl Harbor's Navy Yard. Across the harbor, battleships sat in a tidy row along Ford Island. The Pennsylvania, mighty queen of the battle line, was supposed to occupy Helena's berth, but fate had other plans. The dry dock needed Pennsylvania more than the pier needed Helena. At Aero 757, Lieutenant Commander Shigeharu Murata led 9 Kate torpedo bombers toward what he believed was Pennsylvania. Through the early morning haze, Helena's profile looked enough like a battleship to seal her fate. Only the lead plane released its weapon, a Type 91 torpedo that carved through the harbor's placid waters at 40 knots. The weapon passed beneath the mine layer Oglala moored alongside and struck Helena at frame 75, just below her armour belt. The explosion ripped through her engineering spaces like a giant's fist. Engine room number 1 and boiler room number 2 transformed instantly from ordered machinery spaces into twisted metal coffins. Seawater rushed through a hole large enough to drive a truck through. But Helena was already fighting back. Within 2 minutes, 120 seconds, her forward diesel generator roared to life. Power flowed to her gun mounts. As Japanese planes wheeled overhead for their second attack, Helena's anti-aircraft guns spoke their defiance. 4 bombs straddled her during the second wave, each near miss showering her decks with steel rain. The ship that should have died stayed afloat through miracles of damage control and human determination. 40 of her men lay dead, another 100 wounded, but Helena survived. In the wardroom, blood mixed with oil as medical teams worked to save the living. On deck, gunners stayed at their posts even as their shipmates fell around them. The Japanese pilots who reported her sinking made a terrible mistake. They had awakened a sleeping giant's little sister, and she would remember. In the aftermath of Pearl Harbor, Helena resembled a patient in intensive care. Water sloshed through her wounded hull, and emergency pumps worked around the clock to keep her afloat. But beneath the damage lay a heart that refused to stop beating. By December 9th, just 2 days after the attack, Helena limped into dry dock number 2. Navy Yard workers swarmed over her like surgeons attending a critical patient. Steel plates were cut, shaped, and welded over her wounds. The temporary patches would hold until she could reach a proper hospital. The journey to Mare Island in January 1942 tested every weld and rivet. Pacific swells pressed against her patched hull, searching for weakness. Her crew stood vigilant at damage control stations, ready to shore up any breach. They needn't have worried. Helena was tougher than she looked. At Mare Island, Helena underwent a transformation that went beyond mere repair. The Navy had learned bitter lessons at Pearl Harbor, and Helena would benefit from that brutal education. Her conning tower, which limited visibility during night actions, gave way to an open bridge. Where antiquated 1.1-inch Chicago pianos once stood, crews mounted 4 quadruple 40mm Bofors guns, Swedish-designed democracy wrapped in American steel. But the real revolution came in electronics. Helena received the new SG surface search radar, a marvel that could peer through darkness and fog to find enemy ships at ranges that seemed like sorcery. Combined with new FC and FD fire control radars, Helena could fight blind, a crucial advantage in the knife fights awaiting her in the Solomons. While darkness helped conceal ships from visual spotting, radar gave Helena the ability to see without being seen. Under Captain Robert H. English, then Captain Phillip, who commanded until September 1942, her crew trained with fanatic intensity. They had accounts to settle. Gunners drilled until they could load and fire in their sleep. Damage control teams practiced plugging holes and fighting fires until their responses became automatic. Every man aboard understood their mission. They were returning to the Pacific not as victims, but as hunters. In the mess halls, sailors spoke of revenge. In the engine rooms, mechanics coaxed every possible revolution from the turbines. Helena wasn't just repaired. She was reborn as an instrument of vengeance. By July 1942, Helena was ready. As she passed beneath the Golden Gate Bridge, bound for the South Pacific, her crew lined the rail. Some waved at girlfriends and wives on shore. Others stared westward, toward the enemy who had drawn first blood. The machine gun cruiser was heading to war. The Solomon Islands in late 1942 were a green hell where America and Japan bled for every yard of jungle. Guadalcanal, with its crucial airfield, had become the Pacific War's grinding wheel. Every night, Japanese destroyers and cruisers raced down the slot, the channel between the Solomon chains, to reinforce their garrison and bombard American positions. By early October, Helena served in Task Force 64 under Rear Admiral Norman Scott. Unlike many American admirals who still thought in terms of battleship lines, Scott understood that radar and rapid fire would rule these waters. He drilled his ships relentlessly in night combat tactics, though he made the curious decision to use USS San Francisco as his flagship instead of the radar-equipped Helena. October 11, 1942. The day of reckoning approached as American reconnaissance planes spotted Admiral Aritomo Goto's force streaming toward Guadalcanal. 3 heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers carrying reinforcements and bombardment shells. Scott positioned his force off Cape Esperance, ready to spring history's trap. As darkness fell, Helena's SG radar operator, radioman 3rd Class Robert S. Brown, hunched over his scope. At 23:25, a phosphorescent blip appeared. Enemy ships at 27,700 yards. Helena had found the Japanese before they even knew Americans were hunting. What followed was organized chaos. Scott, operating blind on San Francisco, ordered a column turn that accidentally placed his force across the Japanese T, the perfect position for a naval ambush. On Helena's bridge, Captain Gilbert C. Hoover, who had assumed command in September, grew increasingly frustrated. His radar showed enemy ships at 5,000 yards, practically point-blank range, but Scott hadn't given permission to fire. Finally, at 23:46, Scott's ambiguous "Roger" to another query was interpreted as permission to engage. Helena's turrets, already trained on the enemy, erupted in violence. The first salvo caught the heavy cruiser Ioba completely unprepared. 6-inch shells slammed into her bridge, killing Admiral Goto instantly and wounding her captain. The Japanese admiral died believing his own ships were firing on him. He never imagined Americans could strike from the darkness with such precision. Helena's guns achieved rates of fire that seemed impossible. Spent brass casings rolled across her decks like golden rain as loaders worked in perfect synchronization. The sustained muzzle flashes lit up the night, earning her the nickname that would follow her to the grave. The heavy cruiser Furutaka tried to shield the flagship but sailed into a steel hurricane. Helena's shells found her torpedo tubes, and long-lance torpedoes, Japan's most feared weapon, exploded on their own deck. Furutaka burned like a Viking funeral ship before sliding beneath the black waters. In 14 minutes, it was over. Helena had fired over 1,400 rounds, her barrels glowing cherry red in the darkness. The Battle of Cape Esperance was America's first clear surface victory against the Imperial Navy. Helena had proven that American cruisers could fight and win at night, the enemy's chosen battlefield. As dawn broke, oil slicks and debris marked where Japanese ships had died. Helena's crew, exhausted but exhilarated, had their first taste of victory. It wouldn't be their last. November 1942 brought desperation to both sides at Guadalcanal. The Japanese prepared a massive reinforcement convoy, and Admiral Scott's victorious task force, now led by Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan, stood as the only barrier. Callahan, brave but inexperienced in night combat, made the same mistake as Scott. He chose San Francisco as his flagship instead of the radar-equipped Helena. On the night of November 12-13, Helena's radar again proved prophetic. At Aero 124, her SG scope detected Japanese ships entering Iron Bottom Sound, the waters off Guadalcanal littered with so many wrecks they'd earned their grim nickname. 2 Japanese battleships, Hiei and Kirishima, led a bombardment force intended to pulverize Henderson Field. What erupted at 0148 was less a battle than a bar fight with 14-inch guns. The American column practically collided with the Japanese force. Ships fired at point-blank range, sometimes unsure whether their targets were friend or foe. Searchlights stabbed through the darkness, star shells burst overhead, and tracers crisscrossed like deadly fireworks. Helena's radar gave her a critical edge in this melee. While other ships struggled to identify targets, her fire control tracked Japanese vessels with electronic precision. She opened fire on what her crew believed was a battleship, likely Hiei, at just 400 yards. Her rapid-fire salvos walked up and down the enemy's length, sparking fires and explosions. The destroyer Akatsuki made the fatal error of illuminating Helena with her searchlight. Every American ship that could bear immediately concentrated on the illuminated destroyer. Helena's 6-inch shells joined 5-inch and 8-inch rounds in a convergence of naval gunfire that literally blew Akatsuki apart. She vanished in a massive explosion, taking all but a handful of her crew with her. Helena then shifted to rapid fire against 3 more destroyers, her guns cycling so fast that Japanese survivors reported thinking Americans had developed a new automatic cannon. One destroyer limped away burning, another went dead in the water, and the third fled into the darkness trailing smoke. Through it all, Helena danced between salvos, her engineers pushing her turbines to and past their limits. At one point, San Francisco crossed directly between Helena and her target, forcing a check fire that probably saved American lives. The friendly fire incidents that night claimed Admiral Callahan and Captain Cassin Young of San Francisco, brave men killed by American shells in the confusion. After 40 minutes of point-blank savagery, the Japanese withdrew. Hiei, battered by dozens of hits including many from Helena, lingered behind with jammed rudders. American planes would finish her the next morning, the first Japanese battleship lost in the war. Helena emerged with 1 man dead and minor damage. Her gunners had fired over 1,500 rounds, and her barrels were shot out from the sustained fire. But she had helped stop the Tokyo Express cold. Without that bombardment, Henderson Field survived to launch the planes that would savage Japanese transports over the coming days. As November 13th dawned, Iron Bottom Sound lived up to its name with new wrecks littering the seafloor. Helena had proven herself again, but the cost grew steeper with each battle. Between the legendary battles, Helena lived a grinding routine that tested men as thoroughly as combat. The Solomon Islands offered no respite. If Japanese shells didn't kill you, tropical diseases might. Helena's crew developed the 1,000-yard stare common to Guadalcanal veterans, men aged beyond their years by constant vigilance. Life aboard Helena followed the rhythm of war. General quarters at dawn and dusk, when submarines preferred to attack. Days spent bombarding Japanese positions on Guadalcanal, turning jungle strongpoints into moonscapes. Nights patrolling the slot, radar operators straining to catch the first glimpse of enemy vessels. The crew developed their own culture, born of shared danger. Helena's laundry became legendary, somehow maintaining pressed uniforms even after battle. The ship's band, Helena's Hottentots, played swing music on deck between actions, their jazzy renditions of Blues in the Night carrying across the water to other ships. Food was whatever the supply ships brought, spam, powdered eggs, and coffee strong enough to float a wrench. Fresh vegetables were memories. The ice cream maker, when it worked, produced the most valuable commodity in the South Pacific. Men would trade almost anything for a Dixie cup of vanilla. Captain Hoover proved a steady hand during his tenure. Unlike glory-seeking officers, he understood that survival meant victory in these waters. He drilled his crew constantly, but also knew when to ease the pressure. Movie nights on the fantail, boxing matches on the forecastle, small pleasures that reminded men what they were fighting for. The November 23rd relief of Captain Hoover for failing to adequately report the torpedoing of USS Juno struck the crew hard. They had just fought through hell together, and now their skipper was gone over what many saw as a bureaucratic vendetta. His replacement, Captain Charles P. Cecil, who assumed command in December 1942, had to win over a suspicious crew. Cecil would lead them through their final battles. December 1942 and January 1943 blurred together in routine and exhaustion. Helena bombarded Vila and Munda, supported troop convoys, and chased ghosts on radar screens. Her crew became experts at reading the sea and sky, knowing that survival often depended on spotting the torpedo wake or bomb release a second before the other guy. By February 1943, Helena desperately needed yard time. Her engines wheezed, her guns showed worn rifling, and her hull bore the scars of near misses. The voyage to Sydney, Australia felt like sailing to paradise. Fresh food, cold beer, and women who spoke English awaited. For a few precious weeks, Helena's men remembered what peace felt like. But wars don't pause for liberty. By April, Helena was back in the Solomons, her guns refreshed and her crew rested. The next phase of the island campaign beckoned, and the nightly runs down the slot continued. The machine gun cruiser had more work to do. As spring 1943 turned to summer, American forces prepared to leap up the Solomon chain. New Georgia, with its airfield at Munda, represented the next bloody step toward Tokyo. Helena would play her part in preliminary bombardments that turned Japanese positions into rubble. The routine had become deadly familiar. Slip into contested waters under darkness, pummel assigned targets, and escape before dawn brought retribution. On May 13th, Helena led a bombardment group against Vila, her shells walking through fuel dumps and barracks with methodical precision. The Japanese, learning from experience, had moved most assets inland, but Helena's guns still found plenty to destroy. June 1943 brought intensified operations. Intelligence reported massive Japanese reinforcement efforts, and every American cruiser worked overtime to interdict these movements. Helena's crew, veterans now, prepared their ship with grim efficiency. Extra ammunition came aboard until her magazines bulged. Damage control materials were pre-positioned. Men wrote letters home just in case. On June 30th, Operation Toenails, the invasion of New Georgia, began. Helena provided fire support for the landings at Rendova, her 6-inch shells clearing jungle in 100-yard swaths. Japanese shore batteries replied sporadically, their splashes walking toward Helena until counter-battery fire silenced them. July 4th, 1943, Independence Day, found Helena bombarding Munda Airfield. The Japanese had reinforced their anti-aircraft positions, and black puffs of flak dotted the sky. Helena's anti-aircraft guns replied, their 40mm rounds creating their own fireworks display. It was democracy versus fascism, traced in tracer rounds. That evening, Helena refueled at Tulagi, taking on oil and ammunition for another night's work. Intelligence had spotted another Tokyo Express run, destroyers racing south with reinforcements for New Georgia. Task Force 68, with Helena as a key component, would intercept them in Kula Gulf. The crew sensed something different about this mission. Maybe it was the full moon predicted for that night, eliminating the darkness that usually concealed American ships from visual spotting, though their radar would work just as well. Perhaps it was the reports of Japanese heavy cruisers joining the convoy runs, or maybe it was just the law of averages catching up. Helena had survived too many battles without serious damage. As July 5th became July 6th, Helena entered Kula Gulf for the last time. Her radar operators, the best in the fleet, would spot the enemy first, as always. Her guns would speak with their characteristic rapid fury. But this time, the enemy would punch back with a vengeance that even the machine gun cruiser couldn't survive. The moon rose over Kula Gulf like a spotlight, turning the black waters silver and robbing the Americans of the concealment darkness usually provided. Admiral Walden Ainsworth, flying his flag in Honolulu, led Task Force 68 into the Gulf just after midnight on July 6, 1943. Helena followed in column, her radar already painting contacts to the northwest. The Japanese had learned from their previous encounters. Admiral Teruo Akiyama's reinforcement group included 10 destroyers armed with the deadly Type 93 Long Lance torpedoes, weapons that could reach out 20,000 yards at 49 knots. More critically, the Japanese had finally developed tactics to counter American radar advantages. At 0136, Helena's radar detected the enemy at 22,000 yards. For once, The Japanese radar operators matched American detection, spotting Task Force 68 almost simultaneously. Both sides began their deadly approach, knowing this would be a gunfight where speed mattered more than armour. At Aero 157, Admiral Ainsworth ordered the attack. Helena's turrets, already tracking their targets, erupted immediately. Her first salvos targeted the destroyer Niizuki, Admiral Akiyama's flagship. The range was 11,000 yards, comfortable for Helena's experienced gun crews. Niizuki never had a chance. Helena's second salvo found her, and the following salvos turned the destroyer into a floating pyre. 6-inch shells detonated her torpedo warheads, shattered her bridge, and opened her hull like a can opener. Admiral Akiyama died in the opening minutes, his last sight the muzzle flashes that spelled his doom. But even as Niizuki died, her sisters had launched their long lances. 10 destroyers fired volleys of torpedoes before turning away at high speed, a tactic that traded gunfire for torpedo accuracy. Nearly 50 torpedoes now raced through Kula Gulf's waters toward the American column. Helena shifted fire to the destroyer Suzukaze, her radar-directed shells finding the target despite the range. But she had made a critical error. Her initial salvos used flashless powder, carefully hoarded for night actions. When those special charges ran out, she switched to standard propellant. Each salvo now lit up the night like lightning, clearly marking Helena's position for Japanese torpedo directors. At Aero 203, Helena's luck ran out. 3 long lances found her in quick succession, and the machine gun cruiser's death began. The first torpedo struck forward of turret 1. The explosion was catastrophic. Either her forward magazine detonated, or the torpedo's 1,080-pound warhead simply obliterated her bow. Turret 1 vanished in a pillar of flame that reached 200 feet skyward. The blast rolled through the ship, buckling bulkheads and throwing men against steel walls like rag dolls. Before damage control could respond, the second and third torpedoes struck amidships below her armour belt. These hits broke Helena's keel, the ship's backbone. Her engine rooms flooded instantly, turbines screaming to a stop as seawater rushed in. Electrical power failed, plunging internal compartments into darkness broken only by battle lanterns and flames. Captain Cecil immediately recognised the fatal nature of Helena's wounds. With her keel broken, the ship was already beginning to jackknife. He passed the order all captains dread: abandon ship. But Helena's gunners weren't finished. Even as she settled, her aft turrets continued firing, their crews refusing to leave their posts until the last possible moment. Turret 4 fired until seawater flooded the handling rooms. Turret 5's crew manually trained their guns, firing until the list became too severe to elevate their barrels. The ship broke into 3 sections. The bow section, everything forward of Turret 2, had already vanished. The stern section, containing nearly 400 men, floated independently. The centre section, containing the bridge and most of the engineering spaces, rolled over and sank within minutes. Men struggled in the oil-covered water, some wounded, all shocked by the sudden transition from combat to survival. The destroyer Nicholas, risking torpedo attack, moved in to rescue survivors. Her crew pulled exhausted men aboard while her guns engaged Japanese destroyers trying to finish off Helena's survivors. Dawn on July 6th found Kula Gulf littered with the debris of battle, and nearly 500 Helena survivors still in the water. The bow and stern sections remained afloat, serving as temporary life rafts for hundreds of men. But Japanese aircraft would arrive with daylight, and Admiral Ainsworth faced an agonizing decision. Nicholas and Radford had pulled 739 men from the water during the night, their crews forming human chains to haul oil-soaked survivors aboard. But radar showed Japanese warships still in the area, and dawn meant certain air attack. Ainsworth ordered his ships to withdraw, leaving hundreds of Helena's crew behind. For the men still in the water, July 6th became a test of endurance and will. The tropical sun burned exposed skin, while salt water tortured wounds. Sharks, drawn by blood, circled the survivors. Men formed groups, supporting the wounded and sharing the few life rafts available. On Helena's floating stern section, Lieutenant Commander John L. Chew organized the survivors. The stern still had some food and water, plus medical supplies. Chew established watches, rationed supplies, and maintained discipline. When Japanese float planes strafed the survivors, men dove beneath the twisted steel for cover. That night, 2 American destroyers attempted a rescue but were driven off by Japanese warships. The survivors spent another night clinging to wreckage, their numbers diminishing as wounded men slipped away and sharks took their toll. The story might have ended there but for Coast Watcher Reverend A.W.E. Sylvester on Vella Lavella Island. He reported the survivors' location and coordinated with local natives to guide rescue efforts. On the night of July 7th or 8th, destroyers Nicholas and Jenkins, along with fast transports Dent and Waters, returned to Kula Gulf. Using whaleboats and rubber rafts, they pulled 165 men from the water and the floating stern section. The stern finally sank during the rescue, as if Helena had waited to ensure her crew was safe before taking her final plunge. But 88 survivors had drifted to Japanese-held Vella Lavella. For a week, they evaded enemy patrols with help from native scouts and coast watchers. Living on coconuts and rainwater, moving only at night, they made their way to the island's northwest coast. On July 16th, destroyers Taylor, Maury, Gridley and Ralph Talbot executed a daring daylight rescue, evacuating the last of Helena's survivors under the noses of Japanese forces. The final tally, of Helena's crew of 868, some 168 men died in Kula Gulf or during the rescue operations, but 700 survived, saved by the courage of destroyer crews who risked everything and the determination of survivors who refused to give up. Helena's story could have ended in Kula Gulf, another casualty in the grinding Solomon Islands campaign. But legends don't die easily. In Navy wardrooms and enlisted clubs, veterans told stories of the cruiser that fired faster than any ship had a right to. Her rapid-fire barrages became the stuff of mythology, growing with each retelling. The Navy recognized Helena's extraordinary service with 7 battle stars and the first-ever Navy unit commendation awarded to a ship. The citation specifically mentioned Cape Esperance, Guadalcanal, and Kula Gulf, 3 battles where Helena's guns helped turn the tide of the Pacific War. Her influence extended beyond medals. Helena's combat experiences drove changes in American naval tactics and technology. Her successful use of radar in night battles became standard doctrine. The importance of flashless powder was written in blood. Damage control procedures were revised based on her loss. For decades, Helena rested undisturbed in Kula Gulf, her exact location unknown. Her survivors held reunions, their numbers dwindling each year, but their memories still sharp. They remembered the sound of her guns, the feel of her deck plates, the friends who didn't make it home. In April 2018, Paul Allen's research vessel RV Petrel located Helena in 2,800 feet of water. The remote cameras revealed her hull number, 50, still visible on her stern. Her turrets remained trained out, as if ready to resume the fight. The discovery brought closure to surviving crew members and their families, confirming their ship's final resting place. Today, Helena serves as more than a war grave. She represents the thousands of sailors who fought the decisive naval battles of World War II. Her story teaches timeless lessons about courage, determination, and sacrifice. The ship that survived Pearl Harbor to become the scourge of the Tokyo Express proved that heroes aren't always invincible. Sometimes they're simply too stubborn to quit. From her birth in Depression-era Brooklyn to her death in the tropical waters of the Solomons, Helena embodied the American war effort. Built by workers who needed jobs, crewed by boys who became men, and commanded by officers learning to fight a new kind of war, she was democracy made steel. The Japanese were right to fear the ship they called the machine gun cruiser. But Helena was more than rapid-firing guns and advanced radar. She was 868 Americans who refused to accept defeat, who turned tragedy at Pearl Harbor into triumph at Cape Esperance and Guadalcanal. Even in death, she extracted a price, her guns firing until the water claimed them. In the depths of Kula Gulf, Helena keeps her last watch. Coral grows on her turrets, fish swim through her passages, but her legacy lives on. She remains what she always was, the fighting ship that earned her nickname through sheer determination, and a testament to the generation that saved the world. They called her Machine Gun, and she lived up to her name until the very end. In the annals of naval history, few ships fought harder, died better, or left a prouder legacy than USS Helena CL-50. She was, as her crew always knew, one hell of a fighting ship.